of this. One of, if not the biggest reason so many Americans are feeling the burn is that they trust Bernie Sanders to take on the big banks and rebuild the middle class. Voters know what they're going to get with a Sanders White House, a throwback to the good old days when Democrats stuck up for Main Street instead of Wall Street. But this is not necessarily the case with his opponent, Hillary Rodham Clinton. She served on the board of Walmart, blamed homeowners for the Great Recession, and counts Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and Morgan Stanley among her top donors. But even so, Clinton has tried to paint herself as the real candidate to take on the big banks. Her main tactic is bringing up how much support her Wall Street reform plan has from, quote, the experts, something she did again at Sunday night's Democratic debate.
Yes, well, first of all, Paul Krugman, Barney Frank, others have all endorsed my plan. Secondly, we have Dodd-Frank. It gives us the authority already to break up big banks that pose a risk to the financial sector. I want to go further and add to that.
Pretty persuasive, right? Well, here's the thing. Not every expert thinks that Hillary Clinton's Wall Street reform is the way to go. Some of America's leading economists actually think it's woefully inadequate. And they say that Bernie Sanders' plan to break up the big banks is much, much better. In fact, earlier this month, a group of 170 economists signed a letter officially endorsing Bernie Sanders' Wall Street reform plan. One of those economists joins us now. William Black is an associate professor of economics and law at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, as well as a former financial regulator and author of the book, The Best Way to Rob a Bank is to Own One, How Corporate Executives and Politicians Looted the S&L Industry. Professor Black, welcome back.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
It's great to have you with us. Before we get to the Democrats, which of the Republicans has the best plan to take on Wall Street, in your opinion?
That's a trick question because none of them have any intention of taking on Wall Street.
Brilliant. I just wanted to establish the frame here that no matter how much better Bernie's may be better than Hillary's or vice versa or whatever, there's an important contrast to the Republican Party. Why have you endorsed Bernie Sanders' Wall Street plan and not Hillary Clinton's plan? Why is Bernie's plan better?
Well, the three key differences, and in each of the areas of difference, I think that Bernie's plan is not only better, but actually essential. So one is the one that you've been talking about in part, and that's the systemically dangerous institutions. And there, people like Krugman can't even give them an honest name. They call them systemically important, right? Like they deserve a gold star. But that's not how you get to be in that category. And the Federal Reserve, of all places, is honest about this. It says that you get on that list when you pose a threat to the global economy. So the official belief of the United States government, conservatives, non-conservatives, is that these roughly 20 banks and roughly 5 to 10 other corporations in allied fields like insurance are so big and interconnected that notice I didn't say if, when the next one fails, it will cause a global systemic crisis. And that's even if we bail them out. If we don't bail them out, it's, turn out the lights time.
Yeah.
So the obvious question to people like me is, well, then why would we let those places exist, right? Because we'd be rolling the dice roughly 25 times every day as to, when the next one will blow up. And that's just the ones in the United States. The ones in Europe and Japan and such and China could do the same things to us. So one of the top priorities in the world should be getting rid of these institutions. And the good news in that is that these institutions are so big that they're not only too big to be prosecuted, they're too big to be managed and too big to be regulated. So they would actually be much more efficient if they were smaller. And of course, in addition to the economics, they would no longer dominate our politics in at least the same complete fashion. So it's a win-win-win to get rid of them. Bernie Sanders says gets rid of them, and Hillary Clinton says, nope, We want to keep them around, but we want to make them safe alligators and crocodiles, right? And T-Rexes in our living rooms. So she thinks you can domesticate them and that they will never fail again. There is nothing in economic logic, nothing as a regulator, nothing in human history that suggests that can be done. Now, they will fail. As I say, it's just a question of when. Second thing is Glass-Steagall. Hillary Clinton is very clear that she refuses to support bringing back Glass-Steagall. And that strikes me as very strange on economic grounds and on philosophical grounds. So you have to know the difference here between what's called commercial banking and investment banking. Commercial banking is what normal people are familiar with. You know, you go in, you get a loan from the bank, or a business gets a loan from a bank. But investment banking, you take an ownership position. You own stock, or you outright own the company, or very frequently huge real estate. So we're talking about massive office buildings in Manhattan, that type of thing, right? Where it's the property is supposedly worth somewhere from 12 to 20 billion dollars. Okay, so Congress said, well, we're going to give deposit insurance to stop these runs that are producing these periodic crises. But if we do that, of course, we put the Treasury and the taxpayers on the hook if there are losses. So we don't want to have insure everything, because and second, when we give insurance from the federal government, we're subsidizing it, right? And we don't want to distort the economy by giving subsidies where we don't have to. So why would we ever subsidize one business? And again, investment banking means you own or run business, and then you get to compete with people who don't get federal deposit insurance. Well, you know, you ought to be able to knock their socks off without being any better. So that was a bad idea in terms of the economics. And again, investment banking is much riskier than commercial banking. So you really don't want to provide federal deposit insurance. So Congress, after the PCORA hearings, real investigation that found these risks and also found big conflicts of interest and frauds, said, we're going to separate. Investment banking, you can go do your stuff, but you get no federal deposit insurance. Commercial banking, okay, commercial lending we'll have deposit insurance for. And that worked brilliantly. Dramatically reduced failures, dramatically reduced the cost, even when there was failures, didn't distort the economy as much. But of course, the big banks hated it. And this is all about the biggest banks. This has nothing to do with regular banks. They hated not having deposit insurance for investment banking activities because they wanted to do all these things, right? So they convinced the Wall Street wing of the Democratic Party, who call themselves the New Democrats, and that was Bill Clinton and Al Gore were the leaders of that, that we should get rid of Glass-Steagall, even though it had worked brilliantly for 50 years. So this, of course, violates the primary rule of life, which is if it ain't broke, don't try to fix it because you may well screw it up really badly. And they screwed it up royally. So what happened in the crisis? Well, there were only 5 big investment banks. How many of them are left in the United States? And the answer is 2. So they had a 60% failure rate. So Congress was turned out to be correct, of course. Investment banking is inherently much, much riskier than regular commercial banking. And we shouldn't have deposit insurance, but because of the repeal of Glass-Steagall in 1999 under President Clinton, with the active support of all those Republicans you asked me about, who want no regulation, right? That was a coalition of the unwilling to regulate and the really willing to subsidize. Okay, so who does investment banking? Well, only a handful of the largest banks in the United States do investment banking. Did they make money doing it? No. And the losses during the crisis were large enough in investment banking that all by themselves they would have sunk Citibank or Citigroup. Now, of course, Citigroup didn't sink because guess what?
We bailed them out.
Right? So Hillary Clinton wants to continue this. And by the way, look around the world. And as we are talking, Deutsche Bank, the largest investment bank in Europe, is talking about its losses from investment banking and how it's shrinking its investment banking activities, as are UBS in Switzerland.
Right.
So investment banking has been very...
William Black, we're flat out of time, but net, you're saying Bernie's plan is superior to Hillary's. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, a lot.
Okay. Professor William Black, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.